Hi everyone, hope that you all are doing the next step to the previous video of Oauth2.1 implementation. We will today implement custom login and registration along with Oauth2.1 enable. But before we jump into the video's context, I would like to request you, if you find my videos knowledgeable, please do like, share and comment on the. If new to the channel, please subscribe and press the bell. So by saying custom login and registration with Oauth2.1 enabled, I mean in the application we'll design, we will allow user to either register and login through our app or can log in directly through Google, right, through Oauth2.1 enable. So let's start by implementing the code. I am on my ID. Let's go and let's create a new project. So let me go on new and let me create a project. So I'll keep the name as Oauth2.1 custom login, and we are keeping the Java version as 21. My packages for the code is com.code with raman.implementation. Let's go next and let's insert the dependencies that we require. We require the Spring Web depend. We'll require Spring Security depend. We need the theme leaf dependency for the UI part. Then we need Spring Data JPA for connecting to the database. We need MySQL database driver, and then we need the Oauth2 client. Right. So these are the dependencies that we require in our project, and the Spring Boot version is 3.3.4. right? So let's finish and let's import the project. So my project is ready, right? So this is the structure of my project. Let's go into the pom.xml. This is my pom.xml, Spring version 3.3.4, and then we have the dependent Spring Data JPA, then Oauth2 client, then Spring Security, theme leaf, Spring Starter Web. Right, so these are the dependencies that we require in a project. The Java version we are using is 21, right? So now let's directly start by coding. So let me go into the package structure and let me design a package for model first. Let's go new and let me create a new package. I'll say dot model. I need a class, right? So I will design new class. So let's name the class as user. So we'll be taking a small example here. So let's take a class as user. So this is my user entity, right? So this is my user object. I have ID, name, email ID, password, and also I'm keeping a auth provider, right? So this is like an auth provider that has already been provided. If you go by the basically it's like an enumeration, right? So it's an enumeration that will store two values, local or Google, right? So when the person is registering to our application, we'll store the auth provider as local, and if the person is directly logging through Google, and at that time also we'll be storing the data into the database, and at that point we'll store the auth provider as Google, right? So these are the fields that I'll be storing into my database, and these are the getters and setters of the ID. So now let's go to another package, and then let's create another package of repository. So let me create a new package and let me name it as repository. So this is my repository package, and I need to create a user repository. So let me create a new interface, and let's say user, and we need to extend this by JPA repository, right? As we are using the JPA way of connecting with the database, so we need the JPA repository. We need the user object, right? So this is the user that we are dealing with, and we have the ID too. So the ID that we are taking is of let me check, we are taking the long ID, right? So we have to specify here long, right? So this is my repository is ready, right? And my user object is ready. Now let's design the service package first, and then we'll jump to security package. So let me go and let me create a new package again, and let me name it as service. We'll first write all the services that we require, right? So let me create a class first, and let me say it as a user service. This will be like a service layer between the repository and the controller, right? So this will act as a middle layer between the repository and the controller, and it will be directly interacting with the repository. So this is my user service. I have marked this as @service, right? We have few of the fields, that is user repository we are taking for interacting with the repository, and then we have the bcrypt password encoder, right? We have the constructor of the user repository. Then we are creating a method called as register user, wherein a user object would be given as an input, and we are encrypting the password of the user, and we are also setting the auth provider, right? So the email ID, the name and the password would be provided by the user when he or she would be registering, right? And we'll be encrypting the password, and we'll be setting the set auth provider as local, and we'll be saving the data into a database, right? So this is how we'll be saving the data. And we have also created a method that is process OAuth post login, right? So we are saying that process OAuth post login, that is, this method would be called after the OAuth login has been done, right? So as I said, that when the person is trying to log in through Google, he or she will click on login through Google, and when he or she enters his credentials and give the permission to the application to get login, at that moment we'll be getting a user type as OAuth2 user, right? When I'll be designing the controller, you'll get to know. So we'll get the type as OAuth2 user. Like when we try and log in through our application using Spring Securities, we have our user of type user details, right? Same way, when we are trying to log in through a user that is directly getting logged in through Google itself, then the user type is OAuth2 user, right? So we'll get the type of user as OAuth2 user, and what we are doing, we are fetching the email ID from the OAuth2 user, and we are checking that if the user with this email ID already exists or not. So if the user doesn't exist, then what we are doing, we are creating a new user object and we are saving that user into our database, right? So as I said, that we don't have the password when we are trying to log in through Google. The application will not have the password access, as Google hides that and doesn't give the access to the password, right? So we'll create a user object and we'll save that user object into our database, right? So this will be called after the user is trying to log in through Google itself, right? Not the usual way of registering and login, right? So this was my user service. This is a layer between the controller and the my repository, right? So now I need another class. First let me create a method, right? So let me go and let me create a method in the repository. So let me create a method. So we don't need an object, we need an optional. It is Java util optional and user, right? So now my error would be gone from the service class, right? So error is gone. So now I need another user service, that would be custom user details object, right? That will be extending the user details object, that will help us in trying to log in, trying to auto log into our application by Spring Security. So there are few ways of trying to log in into an application. One is that all the authorization and everything is being done by you, and in that process there are high chances that you can miss on something, right? And then there is another process for authorization of the user, that is through Spring Security. That is that your object will be aligning through user details object that is present in the Spring framework package, right? So if that user detail object is being aligned with your user object, then all the authorization, like checking that the password is correct or not, if the user has a session or not, if the user email ID is correct or not, all those things, roles and everything is being checked by Spring itself, right? So now I'll create a custom user details object. So let me create a new class. Let me name it as custom user details. So here, as I said, that I'll be creating a custom user detail service, and that will be implementing user details, right? And this user details has a method called as load user by username, and we are overriding that method for ourselves, right? So what we are doing, we are simply getting the email ID as an input, and we are fetching the user from our database from the email ID, right? And checking that if the user exists or not. So if the user exists, then what we are doing, we are returning a user details object. User details object includes user email ID, user password, and then the user authority. I have given the hard-coded authority. You can definitely have a authority from the user itself, right, as an input in the registration page. So this is how now here what will happen is that we don't have any of the so we don't have to worry about that how the login process would work. It would be taken care by Spring itself, right? So Spring internally will call the load user by username method and will validate that the user is valid or not, right, through the Spring Security itself, right? So these were my services. Now I need to write the security part. So let me create another package. Let me go in new and let me create a package called as config. Let's say config, and I need to create a class. Let's create a new class, that is security config. Let me say security config. So this is my security config class. We have marked it as @configuration and enable web security, right? So we have custom user details object as a part of the security config constructor, right? So custom user detail, we have already created the object, right? And then we have the security filter chain method. So what we are writing here is that so here we have the security filter chain bean, right? So what we are writing here is we are first disabling the CSRF token, and then we are writing the authorized HTTP request, right? So here we are telling that if /registration/login call comes, then you have to permit it, right? You don't have to check the authentication of that, right? And after that any call comes, then what you have to do is, like, if the call is of /login, then you have to show the form of login, right? So the login form would be shown, and the login page would be /login, and the processing URL would be /login, and default success URL would be dashboard, right? And if the error comes, we are saying that login failed with the error true. And then we have written that Oauth2 login. So let's suppose that a person is not trying to log in through our system. It is he or she is trying to log in through Oauth2 login. Then we have written that if it's Oauth2 login, then also you have to go to the login page, right? Person will click on login with the user, right? And after all the validation, the success URL is dashboard, right? So the person should land on /dashboard only when the Oauth authentication is being done, right? Then we have the logout call, right? So logout is simple, logout call is done. And then we are saying that user detail service is this, right? So we are passing the user detail service. As I said, that the mapping of the object, right? So if our user object maps with the user details object while login, then it should match it, right? So it should match the user details object when we are trying to log in through our own system, right? And then we have done the HTTP build. Then we have the bean of password encoder. We are using bcrypt password encoder to encode the password and store it into our database, right? So this was my security part. Now let me create another package, that is our controller package, and let me write the controller itself. So let me go and let me create a controller package. Let me create a controller class, that is auth controller. So let me say auth controller. So this is my controller. So this is my auth controller. I have taken the user service, and we have also auto wired the user repository, right? So what we are doing here is that we have a constructor of auth controller, and we are passing the user service. Then we have a mapping called as /login, which will show the login page, right? Then we have the /registration, that will show the registration page, right? So the registration page would be shown to the user. And then we have the post mapping of /registration. Here what we are doing, we are getting the input of the user object, and just we are saving to the database. As I said, that we'll be calling the user service register user method, where we'll be encrypting the password, and we'll set the set auth provider as local, and we'll save the data, right? So let's go back to our controller. So this is how the registration process would work, right? Then we have a call for /dashboard. Now your question would be, we don't have a call for post mapping call for /login. So that is being taken care by Spring Security itself. So the person is trying to log in, it will be verified by Spring Security that the password, email ID, user roles and everything is correct or not. And then only he or she will be redirected to /dashboard, right? So now we have a call for /dashboard. So it is a get mapping call. So here what we are doing, we are taking an input as authentication and a model, right? From the authentication, we are getting the principal object, and we are checking that if the principal object is of Oauth2 user, if the instance is of Oauth2 user, or is it of user details, right? So as I said in previously also, that if we are trying to log in through if we are trying to register and log in through our application through Spring Security, then our user would be an instance of user details, right? And if the person is trying to log in through Google, then the user instance would be of Oauth2 user, right? So now if the person is of Oauth2 user, right? So if the person is trying to directly log in through Google, then what we have done is we have taken out the principal object. The principal object would be Oauth2 user, and then we are calling the process Oauth2 post login. So after login, we are also storing the data of the user into our database. So we are storing the email ID, we are storing the name, and we are also storing the auth provider as Google, right? So same way you can see that we don't have the password here, and that is why I haven't written any code for password encryption, right, and storing that. So we will simply store the email, name, and auth provider, right? So password won't be there. So first we are checking that if with that same email that person doesn't exist in our database. If that person exists, we won't save it. If the person doesn't exist, we'll save the data into our database. Then what we are saying, we are fetching the email ID and name, and we are putting it into the model to show it on the HTML, right? Same way, if our authentication.get principal is an instance of user details, then what we are doing, we are again getting the user details object, and through that user details we are fetching the username, that is our email ID, and then we'll check into our database that if that user exists or not, and then we are fetching the name and the email ID to display it on the HTML, right? And then we are simply returning the dashboard HTML, right? So we are done with the code part, we have done the controllers, we have done the services, and we have done with the repository part. So now let's design the HTMLs first. So let's go into the resources and let's design the HTML. Let me design the first HTML, that is our register HTML. So let me say register.html. This is my registration HTML. Here I am just taking the input as name, email ID, and simply clicking on the register button. So the register button will take me to the /registration call through action, right? So this is my registration HTML. Let me create a login HTML. Let me go to templates and let me create new login HTML. Let's say login.html. So this is my login HTML. Here for people to log in through our application, we are giving that put in your email ID and the password here, and then we are giving a button of login. Also we are providing a provision to log in through Google, right? So we are calling that if you want to log in through Google, click on this button. You will be redirected to the Google interface and you can try to log in there, right? So now let me create the dashboard HTML, and let me just create a new HTML. So this is my dashboard HTML. We are simply saying that welcome to the dashboard, and we are displaying the name of the user that would be transferred from the controller itself, and then also we are displaying the email ID of the person, right? And then we are giving the logout functionality, right? So we are done with the code part, just that we need to add some properties to our properties to our application or properties. So everything remains the same, that we have to connect with the database. All those properties would be put in here, and the properties of our secret key and Google properties would be entered here. So these are my properties, right? So these are my Google properties, and then we have our database properties as well. So I'll create a database schema into a database, and then we'll be working on our application. So let me go and create a schema. So let me create a schema, create schema, and let me paste the schema name. So I will have the schema name, and let me set this as default. So set as default, and now we are ready to run the application. So let's go on the main class and let me run the application. So this is my main class. So let me run the application, run with Spring Boot. So my application is started. Let me refresh and let me see that my table is created or not. So let's go and let's click on and let's see. So now my table has been created, right? So my table has been created. You can see ID, auth provider, email, name, password. So let's go to the browser and let's run the application. Register. This is my registration page. Let me enter few details. Let me name Raman, email ID raman@gmail.com, password as 12345. Let me say register. So it says that the registration is success. Let's go to the browser. So this is my data. So the ID is 1, and you can see that the auth provider is local. Email ID is raman@gmail, and the name is Raman. And then we have the encoded password, right? So now what we can do is we can try and log in through our email ID and password as we have provided. So let me say Raman, and let me say the password as 12345. So yes, now you can see that on my dashboard it says welcome to your dashboard Raman, and your details are my email ID has been provided. So let's say logout, and then we have a provision of login with Google. So let me click on login with Google, and it will take me to the user interface of Google. Let me click on my email ID and let me give permission. So it will redirect me directly to the dashboard HTML, right? So it says welcome to the dashboard Ramanpreet Singh, and your details are my email ID, right? So now I'll tell you the difference. So let me go into the database, and let's see that I have a second entry also. So you can see that second entry is of Google. Auth provider is Google. The email ID is this. Name is this. But you can see that a password field is null. So password is not being provided to us by Google. So this is the difference. We can store the data at our front as well. And if this is not necessity that we have to store the data. But if you want to work on analytics of that data, that what that person would perform on your application, what actions he or she takes on your application, so you can store the data of that user as well to know the analytics related to that user. So this is how you can implement custom login with Oauth 2.1 enabled, right? So this was it from this video. I'll share the complete playlist of Oauth 2.0 and Oauth 2.1 implementation along with the basic implementation and the custom implementation. Hope you people like, share and comment on the videos, and if you are new to the channel, please subscribe and press the bell icon. Hope to see you in the next video. Till then, happy learning.